Will you get the decision in your asylum case on the day of your interview? And if not, how long will you have to wait and how will you get it exactly? Well, in this video, in addition to addressing those questions, I'm going to tell you what the possible outcomes may be in your asylum case, which can vary based on one really important factor. I'm also going to tell you what happens next after you get your decision. And we'll also cover what happens if your asylum case is not being heard by the asylum office, but rather by a judge in immigration court. I'm Brian Manning. I used to be an asylum officer with the government, but now, as an asylum lawyer, I help immigrants all over the country secure their future in America through asylum. All right, let's address the question we started with. Will you get a decision on the day of your asylum interview? Answer, no, you won't. The asylum officer won't tell you whether you're getting asylum. In fact, they won't even give you a hint. They'll try throughout the interview to maintain a poker face, a steely countenance, so that you can't get a good read on which way they're leaning. During the interview, either near the beginning or at the very end, the officer will explain how you're going to get your decision. They'll tell you whether yours is a mail-out case or a pickup case. What does that mean? Well, a pickup case is one where the applicant, and that's you, has to come back to the asylum office and pick up or receive in person their decision. In contrast, for mail-out cases, the asylum office sends your decision to you by mail. You don't get to choose which of these methods you prefer. Rather, the officer will tell you how this will be handled, and they do so based on local office policy. So if you live far away from the asylum office, then you'll get your decision by mail. And what do I mean by far away? Well, when I was an asylum officer in Houston, 150 miles was the standard. If you lived farther than that, then you got your decision by mail. By the way, remember, you always need to ensure that the asylum office has your current address. This is something the officer should ask you about during your asylum interview. Now, if you live closer to the office, then you'll probably, but not necessarily, be asked to return there in 2 weeks to get your decision. And in that scenario, once you check in, someone, usually support staff, will hand you a letter that explains the decision. Usually, they briefly go over it with you, explaining what it means. Note that fairly frequently, people who have been told to come in to pick up their decision get a phone call before the pickup date telling them not to come in and that their decision will be mailed to them. Why does this happen? Well, because the decision has not been finalized yet for them. You see, there are several things that need to happen for a decision to be made, and sometimes it takes longer than 2 weeks to get this done. The officer has to review the case, and they may need to do research on conditions in your country or do legal research before they can come to a decision. They must then write what's called an assessment, where they explain in writing what the facts of the case are, what their decision is, and how they arrived at that decision. And then their supervisor has to review it and make sure the decision is legally defensible. Now, to be clear, the decision is made by the officer. The supervisor is basically just ensuring that there's some rational basis for what the officer has decided, that it's not just flat out wrong in light of the law and USCIS policy. Now, finally, support staff have to perform some administrative tasks before the decision is ready to be served on or delivered to the applicant. Now, if there's a hiccup with any of these steps, issuing a decision in your case can be delayed. And when that happens, it's most often for one of two reasons. Either the officer just takes too long in handling your case, or there are security checks pending that need to be resolved. Asylum officers are overwhelmed with work. Really, the workload is pretty ridiculous. So sometimes it just takes a long time to finish a case. Or your case might kind of fall through the cracks. It could just sit on a shelf somewhere and basically be forgotten about. If your decision is being mailed to you, you won't receive it for at least 2 weeks after the interview. And unfortunately, it could be quite a bit longer. Most often it takes several weeks, and in some cases it takes months or even years. By the way, if it's been years since you applied and you haven't gotten a decision, then you should consider suing the government to force them to take action on your case. All right, so once you do finally get a decision, what might it look like? What will it say? If the asylum officer makes a positive decision, then the letter will say that you've been granted asylum, and that's it. That's a final decision, and you can stay in the United States. You can also work legally as soon as you get your approval letter. And importantly, you're eligible to apply for permanent residence 1 year after the effective date of your asylum approval. Now, permanent residence comes with more rights and more stability than just having asylee status. So you should definitely apply for it as soon as you're eligible. Then, 4 years after getting permanent residence, you're eligible to apply for US citizenship. Now, included with the asylum approval letter will be a little white rectangular card, or it's more like a piece of paper really, called an I-94. Now, it's the official record of your asylee status, so be sure to keep it someplace safe. Also, Take a photo of this I-94 card and of your decision letter so that you'll have a record of them in case you lose them. Now, we've been discussing a positive decision or a grant of asylum, but what if the decision goes the other way? What if the officer says you're not eligible for asylum? Well, what happens next depends on your immigration status at the time when USCIS makes this negative decision. Now, if someone still has valid immigration status at that moment, like if their tourist or student or business-based status is still in effect, then they get what's called a notice of intent to deny. And this is a letter that briefly explains the officer's reasoning in concluding that you're ineligible for asylum. And it says that you have 16 days to respond in writing for the purpose of trying to change the officer's mind. It's kind of like an appeal. It's hard to change the officer's mind, but it is sometimes possible. Now, if you submit a rebuttal to this notice of intent to deny, then the officer considers it and then makes a final decision. And they look again at that moment at your immigration status. If you still have valid status, then your case just gets denied. They'll mail to you a denial letter. The letter says basically, sorry, you're not eligible for asylum, claim denied. And that's it. Nothing further happens. The person still has their other status, whether it's student status, tourist status, or whatever, and they can stay here as long as that status allows them to stay. But it's different if you don't have legal status at the moment when USCIS makes a negative asylum decision. In that case, they send your case to immigration court. Now, the asylum office calls this a referral instead of a denial, but it's effectively a denial. They've decided you don't qualify for asylum and have actually initiated deportation proceedings against you. Because you see, in immigration court, the government is, in fact, trying to deport you. In immigration court, you do get another chance to explain your case. You get to try to convince an immigration judge that you qualify for asylum. And the judge will either give you asylum or make an order of deportation against you. And if you receive an order of deportation, you can appeal that decision up to 2 higher authorities. So you can keep fighting your case for quite a while, probably for years. So it's not like you're going to actually get deported anytime soon after receiving a negative decision from the asylum office. The immigration court and the appeals process will give you quite a bit of time. But still, you don't want to be in deportation proceedings in immigration court because then you're at real risk of getting an order of deportation, which isn't good. So you should do everything possible to win your case at the asylum office. And if you want to maximize your chances for asylum success, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss the insights that I share on this channel. Now, we talked about how you get a decision from the asylum office, but what about people whose asylum claim isn't with USCIS, but rather is pending in immigration court? Now, this is different. You likely will learn your fate after you present your case. In immigration court, there are usually 2 hearings, and the second one, called an individual hearing or a merits hearing, is where you explain your case. And the judge normally does make a decision right then and there at the end of that hearing. And if they do make a decision at the end of this individual hearing, then they'll tell you what it is. And when they do so, they'll likely give a brief explanation of their reasoning. But sometimes the judge decides they need more time. They may want to go back and review the evidence in the case file, or perhaps listen to the audio of the hearing to consider again what you and your witnesses, along with the lawyers, have said. They may also need to do research before they can reach a decision. Now, how long will it take for the judge to mail you a decision if they have to mail it to you? As with the asylum office, it's going to be at least a couple weeks, but it could also be much longer, unfortunately. If you're ready to take the next step and get individualized help with your asylum case, then call my office today at 713-909-0401. We help people all over the country, so it doesn't matter where you are. Call us now to set up an asylum strategy session so we can help you secure your future in America through asylum. Again, I'm Brian Manning, and it's an honor to serve you in your asylum journey.